why do you keep working? Like, what drives you at this point to do this work?
I was very uncomfortable. I was scared to be there, to be trapped there, to live there. Buying back time is an incredibly valuable thing that I'm always striving to do, because the only two things I want to do in my life is either be hyper-focused and hyper-productive business-wise, or be completely present with my friends and families and loved ones. Like, that's it.
How do you determine what massive value is? How do you choose, like, this is the problem, like, I'm going to tackle, this is where I think I can contribute the most value?
I'm obsessed with that question. It was a great interview. I
best.
think this was the most personal, in-depth interview.
Welcome to today's episode of Getting to Know You. I'm your host, Cameron Edward Benton, and on today's episode, I have the great pleasure of introducing you to Mathieu Gallant, or Matt Gallant. He is the CEO and co-founder of BiOptimizers, and he's one of my favorite people I've ever had the pleasure of meeting. Matt has been somebody in my own back corner as a mentor, someone who has reached below his cultural status, at least. He's someone who is very successful, made several businesses that are all making lots of money and have all made a ton of money. He has nothing really to prove in the world, and he is somebody who, at a time where I was looking to grow and expand, offered his time to me and his network to me in a way that helped me grow and lift up my own career. And Matt is someone who I've always been incredibly curious by, because he is just that combination of successful, wise, inspirational, and deeply contemplative and spiritual. There's a real depth to Matt that I have always noticed and felt in every moment I've ever been around him. And it has been a great gift to have him in my life, even in just the small moments where we have had some time to connect or be around each other. In this episode, I really hope that you get to see just how incredible of a person he is. I was really honored that he did this podcast with me, and that at the very end of the episode, he said that this was the deepest podcast he's ever had a chance to do. He's such a brilliant person that so many times on podcasts, he's often delivering tips and tricks on productivity, on business, and all of these different things that he has so many amazing skill sets for. And honestly, we even got a little bit into that trap of the similar at the beginning of this episode as well. But that said, we really take a hard pivot into his own personal journey, how he became the person that he is now today, and the journey that he went through. Matt is, again, just an absolutely incredible soul and human being, and it is my absolute pleasure to introduce you to Matt Gallant. So without further ado, here is Getting to Know. All right, on today's show, we have Matt Gallant. He is CEO and co-founder of Newtopia and BiOptimizers. He's a world-class marketer. He's made millions and millions of dollars. I think he's talked about creating over 100 different products, and he's been in the internet marketing space for over a decade, probably close to 2 decades at this point. Matt, welcome to the show. Thanks for coming on.
Just to give people a little bit of context, Cameron and I met and just connected and kind of hooked up with one of his former employments. And yeah, I'm just bonded and excited that you're building a podcast, because I think it's going to be fun and interesting and a little deeper than most podcasts. So that's why I'm here.
Yeah, awesome. Well, I appreciate it, Matt. Yeah, and that's definitely the goal, is to get to know you, which is why it's the name of the podcast, and to dive into who you are, because I think you're such an incredible human being. You've made a tremendous impact in my life, just personally, and then obviously the impact that you're making globally with your companies and the work that you do, which maybe is like a great place to start. Is you talk about it on your website and you go through your history. Like, you've made more than enough money to just retire and just kick it back and go sit on the beaches of Panama and just not do anything. And I know for you personally that, like, money isn't like some great motivator for you. You're not just like, oh, I want to just accumulate as many assets as possible. So, like, why do you keep working? Like, what drives you at this point to do this work?
My obsession now is value creation. There was certainly a time in my life, which we can get into, where I was born in a village of 325 people. I know because I actually did the census for the church one
Mhm.
summer. So we went house to house and did interviews, but in a dead end road where
Wow.
maybe 5, 6 cars a day passed in front of the house. So being born in that environment, I was very uncomfortable. I I was scared to be there, to
Mhm.
be trapped there, to live there. That started in my teenage years. Obviously, there was a time in my life where I didn't know any different. It was awesome and great place to be born and raised.
Mhm.
So my parents were great, and my dad has like 40 acres now. So yeah, just it was like just living in the
Wow.
country. It was great summers, brutal winters,
Mhm.
but
Mhm.
during my teenage years, I started developing this angst, which just continued to become more and more intense
Mhm.
as I started reading business books. So as I started becoming more aware, if you will, of the outside world and learning about business and commerce and just how the world worked, I started to build a very intense desire to escape. And it was escaping kind of the
Mhm.
small minded mentality of small towns. And I don't think it's anything special or unique about where I'm from. I think every small town has that. So in my early 20s, and we get into kind of all the things I did business wise after, but it just continued to intensify
Mhm.
to the point where it was fear and anger, and I just wanted to leave. So
Mhm.
became a workaholic in my early 20s, was a trainer. I was working like 80 hours a week, saving as much money as possible to be able to move. And then I moved to Vancouver. So that was like the first escape. Like I wanted to first escape was leaving the village and going to the
Mhm.
to the nearest city, which was Moncton, which was like 100,000 people. And that felt good, but still
Mhm.
felt trapped. And then I read a book called Permanent Traveler. That book really shaped my view of how I wanted my life to be. And for people that are not familiar with that book,
Mhm.
it's a book that really shaped the entire kind of offshore industry. It's a five flag theory. So the theory
Mhm.
is, or the strategy is, you build five flags. One, you plant the first flag where you're not taxed on your worldwide income. Second flag is a passport that doesn't tax you no matter where you are, and that's where the U.S. passport is obviously not ideal.
Mhm.
Third flag is where you go have fun. Fourth flag for banking. Fifth flag for your trust foundation, things like that. So I read that book, and then instantly I made the decision. This is like probably 21, 22 of I want to live abroad. I didn't know where, I didn't know how. I just knew that's what I wanted to do. And then I started to, again, work, save money, move to Vancouver. Vancouver was an awesome city. It was really thrilling. Moved there with my first wife and built a successful
Mhm.
personal training company there. And it was during my time in Vancouver where my internet businesses started taking off. So I had my first success 2002. I did sell my first product on the internet in 1997 on a Newsnet group while I was in university. That's another story. But
Mhm.
um, yeah, built that. And after 3 years in Vancouver, um, my my online business took off. I got divorced, and circumstances were
Mhm.
perfect to move to Panama, which I have, and I've been here like 19 years now. So, anyways, that's kind of
Wow.
the general geography journey of my life. And part of me
Mhm.
at some point, and just to go back to your original question, which was, okay, why am I still driving? And I'm actually probably as driven now, if not more, than I was back then. What's
Mhm.
changed is the energy behind it. So back then, again, as I mentioned, it was fear and angst,
Mhm.
and that drove me for a long time. Then it shifted. At some point, it became I was very driven by insecurities, feeling like even though I was successful, I was making a top 1% income. I I felt inadequate. I felt like I was always comparing myself to people that were at another level than I was. So that was creating another
Mm-hmm.
drive, more like a pride driven drive, if you will, or insecurity driven drive.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
that fueled me for a long time. And it's really suffering. I want to be clear, like those things are good temporarily, but man, long term, it's horrible for your emotional health. Where it all
Mm-hmm.
changed was I went and did Biocybernaut. So I did Biocybernaut. It's been just a little over 8 years. I did that, and
And just for quick context, can
sure,
you explain like what
thanks, and yeah,
Biocybernaut is for people who don't know?
clarifying questions. So heard about this
Yeah, of course.
place from a good friend of mine who actually worked there for a little bit, and this guy is, let's just call him a skeptic. He's not into woo, not that much into spirituality, just like a hardcore kind of nuts and bolts type of
Mm-hmm.
guy. So I'm chatting with him, and he's telling me all these crazy stories that I could tell just blew his mind. Just he could barely believe they happened, but he witnessed them, so obviously he believed it. Just people transforming and just having some really profound spiritual experiences and all that. So obviously I'm intrigued because I'm into optimization. And then a friend of mine went, and I saw him during Christmas, and I instantly felt his energy was different. I'm like, okay, something has changed. Like I didn't even have a conversation. I could just feel his energy was very different. His level of consciousness had risen. There's no doubt about it. So 2 months after that, we're like, let's go. So we both went together, did the first training, and what it is
Mm-hmm.
essentially it's neurofeedback. So you have electrodes wired on your brain, which is feeding you back what's occurring within your brain because we don't have sensors in our mind. So the sensors, the electrodes, allow us to train different things. So we can train alpha, which is the only thing we did that week. And the way you train is you're in these pitch black rooms where you're getting audio feedback if you're doing the right thing. So you're essentially creating a dopamine loop, and the dopamine is driving the learning, where when your brain's doing the right thing, you get louder sounds and your brain's like, okay, you want me to do more of that? You like that? Gives you dopamine, and you just keep going. And your brain's learning nonstop, second by second by second.
Mm-hmm.
But that's only like half of it, or maybe even less than half. The other part of it is the emotional processes that they guide you through. And, they have this really well developed, sophisticated forgiveness process, which they discovered when you do what they call effective forgiveness, your alpha explodes. So your alpha brainwaves explode, and alpha is a state where you're calm but alert, your heart centered. It's a really good place. And, when people typically start meditating, it's a good kind of first goal milestone to achieve is ability to shift from a beta dominant state to an alpha dominant state. So we trained that for a week. And what occurred after that was I feel like I probably did about like 80 forgivenesses. It was 7 days. It was, 14 to 16 to 18-hour days. It was very intense. And what happened
Mm-hmm.
was my limbic system, my traumas, my pain got cleaned enough. I wasn't completely clean, but it took off a lot of the really intense stuff. And then I kind of reconnected with my essence. So I'm circling back to your question because in my early 20s, I always felt I had a destiny to build some really epic things. Okay. Some really, like billionaire level things. I mean, that was the level I was thinking in my early 20s. And that got beaten down over the years. Like I tried a couple of things
Mm-hmm.
that didn't work, and I kind of got humbled over the years. And, my progression in business was, massive ambitions, didn't have the skills, didn't have the resources, didn't have the mentors, didn't have any of the things I needed to make my huge mega visions happen. So my visions kind of got squished down to my level, my skill level, so to speak. And then was successful with the ventures that I did. But they were, smaller in nature things, things like college pro painters, built 2 personal training companies, helped my first wife build a successful dog walking company, and then started building business online. And, I had a lot of good successes, but not what I considered mega grand slams. And my first major objective was to build kind of my dream lifestyle. So I achieved that in my mid 30s. And my dream lifestyle was, work 20 hours a week, make a really good income, take 8 weeks of vacation a year. I achieved that, I think, when I was 35 or 36. And it was awesome. And I did that for several years. And then again, that's when I did the Biocybernaut. And what happened after that, I just kind of got reconnected with my essence and my dharma. And then a drive came on that was very different than any other drive. And I just feel it's my true essence. Like my essence as a human being is to build amazing things that are going to improve people's lives in health and in their brains, and bring it to the world. And, that's what I'm here for. And that's what I'm doing right now. So that's why I'm still driving, if not driving harder than I ever have been. And again, you could put $100 billion in my bank account tomorrow. I'm just doing more. I'm launching more things. Like, I have enough projects and visions to keep me busy for at least 25, 30 years. So if I had $100 billion in the bank, I would just accelerate those timelines.
Wow, that's awesome. Something you talked about with that was this idea of like wanting to create massive value with whatever you're doing, that this has been like a driver and continues to driver. How do you determine what massive value is? I mean, you're somebody who has, you've accumulated a lot of wealth. You're a brilliant person. You see a lot of world problems. You've traveled all over the world. And there's so many, from my landscape at least, right? There's so many challenges that the world has, right? There's poverty, there's sickness, there's, poor media. There's like all of these different challenges that go on. How do you choose like, oh, this is the problem, like I'm going to tackle, this is where I think I can contribute the most value?
I'm obsessed with that question. I think that you just nailed the key question, which is, what is massive value? So I'm going to go deep into that question, because I think that question, if anybody listening wants to build a business, like, that's the question. So first of all, it's contextual to every market, and it's contextual and subjective to every individual. So if you grilled you with 100 questions to figure out what value means to you, it would be very different than what value means to me. And it changes over time, right? Like, if somebody is, let's say, economically challenged, they don't see time the same way. Like, one of the big things that changes as you build wealth is how you see time and how you value time. So, and there's a lot of levels to that. So first, obviously, if your income's increasing, let's say you go from making 50 grand a year to 100 grand a year, the value of your time just doubled. Okay. Like, on a factual, objective basis,
right,
the value per hour that you're generating is twice as much as it was. And obviously, as you go beyond that, it increases. So for people that have a lot of money, I'm just using that as an example. I'm going to give you a bunch of ones, but one of the most valuable things, if not the most valuable, is always time. So for them, anything that they can buy, they're going to try to buy back time as much as possible. So how do you buy time? First of all, my good friend Dan Martell just released his book, Buy Back Your Time. Incredible book. I've known Dan for a long time and have had tons of conversations around this topic. And he's just a master of buying time. And so is kind of every hyper successful, hyper wealthy person. Meaning that, when I moved to Panama as an example, one of the reasons I moved here was I could just buy more time for my money. So I've always had a maid for 19 years. Now we have, I think, 4 people working for us in our home. We have a child. So, there's just a lot of things that I just don't do. I don't shop for food. I don't prep food. I don't clean. I don't do any of these things because I've bought that time back. And, so for me, I'm just kind of being personal right now. Buying back time is an incredibly valuable thing that I'm always striving to do, because the only 2 things I want to do in my life is either be hyper focused and hyper productive business wise, or be completely present with my friends and families and loved ones. Like, that's it. I don't want that gray zone of having to do things that are not, again, hyper valuable emotionally or hyper valuable business wise, economically. But, let's use a different market. I know you're into EDM shows, right? So I know you're a huge fan.
Yeah.
So even within that market, let's use that. I'm going to kind of turn the tables onto you for a second. Tell me, what are the dream features or things that you appreciate the most from an EDM concert?
I mean, for me, I'd say that the biggest things are obviously the performances. So if you wanted to break those as separate things, you could say like the music, the visual component. So those 2 aspects merge together. You have the people, which I think is one of the biggest ones. And then you just have like the freedom to just be whoever and whatever you are in that moment. So I think those are the 3 biggest things that come out to my mind of like why I love those performances and that arena and that space is just like, it's a place of pure joy and self-acceptance and
so
expression.
If we break that down from, what's massive value in the EDM space, right? And again, let's put ourselves in the shoes of the EDM concert promoter. So his main job and function is to create that value. So obviously there's the performers, and then we'll drill down to the performers in a second. But one, he has to make sure that he gets the right performers where people like you are excited to go see them, right? Because I think that's the number one factor in the value equation. Now, keep in mind that value equations for every market are complex. It's not just one factor. But I think one of the most powerful questions to ask yourself at all times in all things is, what is the critical factor? And you spend the majority of your energy, time, money on solving the critical factor question. So from a concert promoter perspective, I think the critical factor is, can we get the right performers? Can we get a headliner that's going to sell 20, 30,000 tickets, and then you fill the rest of the card with other performers, and that'll draw in a few more people. But that's the first piece. And then obviously the visuals is another piece. The bathrooms, like the bathroom, I've been a Burning Man a couple times, right?
Yeah.
Like one of the things I value that surprised me and, I came to value it the most was how clean the bathrooms were at a place like Burning Man. Like I've been to a lot of festivals. It wasn't what I expected.
Well, that's the biggest thing with like any of the VIPs really usually is like, even if like the VIP experience, and I have a whole thing in the book that I'm writing about the VIP experiences, like is even if most of them are terrible, like the one thing they always are getting is the bathrooms, because having your own exclusive bathroom as a VIP where you can go to your own space where there's just less people using it, where they maintain it more, is worth an extra like $400 or $500 at these events, which is
again,
wild.
It's part of the value equation for that market. So we can keep going on and on, but let's focus on another piece of it. Okay, so let's focus on the artists. So obviously, being a successful artist, one of the most competitive games in the world, probably as competitive, if not more, than professional athletes. I don't know if you saw the stats that came out. There was like 38 million songs that came out on Spotify with 0 views, 0 listens, right? So incredibly tough space.
Wow.
And, if you're an artist, let's say I'm an artist, I have to figure out, obviously how to create a song. And songs, it's not just one, but let's just start with the one song. I need to create a song that's so compelling that first it grabs somebody's attention, right? You'll listen to the first 5 seconds and you don't click skip. And then the song needs to be strong enough that I keep listening. And then the song needs to make me feel something emotionally that I want to feel. And that makes, and everybody, this goes back to the subjectivity of value. Like if we put Metallica, let's say we had 100 people in a room, just random people. We put Metallica's new album on, okay, which I'm loving. Right. What's really interesting is that everybody's going to feel the same thing, which is going to be aggression, intensity, angst. But some people are going to love that feeling, love that emotional release, and other people are going to hate it. So same emotion, right? Same product, same driving force, but some people love that and some people hate that, right? Just like some people love horror movies, some people hate horror movies. They're all feeling the same thing, but some people love that adrenaline release and other people don't, which what's really interesting about music, and there's a lot of things like that, is that the value is in the emotional release. Okay. So this is a very, you could say, relatively untapped, unknown marketing strategy. And when I say marketing, it's also part of the product. If you take a guy like Alex Jones, okay, why is Alex Jones so successful? I mean, the guy is essentially just on the edge of madness. And it's a character and he's amplifying it to the max, but he's essentially giving people emotional release. So when we ask the question, what is the value that Alex Jones is creating in the world? Well, for all the people that feel indignant, righteous rage, he's giving them an outlet to activate that and to release it, to feel it. So again, we could speak for hours about what value means. And it's, again, if you're going into a business, let's say like this podcast, okay, this podcast is a product. So the question that I would be obsessing about if I was you is like, okay, what is value? And before you can answer that question, you have to pick a market. Everything starts with, who do I want to serve? That's the first question. And, let's say it's people, 25 to 40. And again, is it male and female? Is it both? And the more precise you can become with those qualifiers, and the more you tune into what they want or what they need, the better you're going to answer that value question and the more successful your podcast is going to be.
Yeah. Cool. Awesome. Thank you. And that honestly leads to another question I had for you, especially with someone who you have been in the business space for so long and you have been very successful with this stuff, is like, there is this dance, whether I've seen it with business or art or all this stuff, between understanding the market and doing what is quote unquote best for the audience, and sort of also following that inner voice, following that intuition of oh, this is what I love, right? Or this is what I'm going to do, or this is how I'm doing it. And I see it in your aesthetics, right? The boxes for Utopia are just gorgeous, and your branding, and there's an element of oh, this is Matt. I can tell there's a level of your influence personally that's there. And without that, even though it's not something that quote unquote the market, I mean, I guess it ends up being something the market wants, but it's not something you would necessarily get from market research. I guess it's something that you have to kind of follow that own intuitive hit. How do you balance that dance between kind of trusting your own inner voice and the data from the market, question, if you will?
I think the biggest advantage or the biggest edge is to be your market. So if you are your market, and like I am my market in health, right? Like I'm spending a lot of time, energy, money optimizing all kinds of things. And I know if something excites me, because again, I'm market, if something excites me, is going to excite a lot of other people in that market. So that's where if I wasn't passionate about health and all the aspects of it, then I would be at a massive disadvantage. Like I would lose that intuitive download that you're mentioning. Like I'd have to rely on data versus now, again, if I know something excites me, a lot of other people will be excited. But you bring up a good point, and I think if I think back around all of the most successful funnels, sales letters, and products that I've created or co-created, there was definitely a download, and I think the download comes from loading, really being immersed in the market, taking in as much information as you can, and then letting consciousness drop the nugget, drop the bomb. And I will say, I do believe that if you do brain training, especially theta, which, I did a lot at 40 Years of Zen, which, you worked at, the better you are at accessing theta, I think the more downloads you get. And it's a very valuable thing. Like I believe that we're all in the field of consciousness, and that consciousness is like this mega Google-esque computer, and that we can download information from. And, again, I've written a lot of music, I've created a lot of things, and, I know a lot of musicians, I know a lot of hyper creative people. It feels like it's just coming outside of us. So where is that coming from? Again, I think it's just people are tuned in based on their level of consciousness and their brains, and they're downloading information. And then there's an opportunity there. When you download something, there's still the human element of, are you going to bring this to the world or not? Right? It's not like the universe is forcing you to bring it to the world. You get this idea, this vision, like a book or this podcast or whatever products that we're working on. And you have to make the decision, and then, of course, spend the time and energy and take the risk to bring it to the world. And that's the business side.
Yeah. I think that there's a couple of things like universally that I've seen through a lot of artists or reading a lot about artists. And like one of those is that download aspect where, I can't remember the actor's name right now, but he talks about, he actually paints a lot. And he said that he thinks that like the artist, and you probably resonate this even with the business owner or any sort of creative actor, is like the job of sort of the human is like, you have the vision for the thing. And it's like the practice is, how do I get better at making in reality something that's closer to that vision, right? And it's like whether I'm writing or whether I'm painting, it's like at first I can draw stick figures and I get a little bit closer and a little bit closer to the actual vision in my head. Because when you are paying attention, when you are in that creative act, it allows stuff to flow and come out of you. But to your point almost earlier with your original story, where you got kind of bogged down from your original business vision, right? It's like your skill set might not be there yet, right? I think it's a saying where it's like your taste will outweigh your skill, especially early on. And so having that understanding and being like, okay, cool. Well, I'm going to keep like holding that vision and like trust that I'm going to keep getting better and keep progressing and moving towards it. Because I think early on, I know for myself, like it can be very easy to get almost discouraged by like, well, here's this thing I have in my head, but here's this ugly drawing that's coming out. And like, I can't reconcile these two things. How do I, and a lot of people can give up at that first notion, versus continue
The majority
to
give
progress.
up. The majority give up. So like learning curves are exponential in nature, and that's what people don't understand. So at first, like a learning curve is really slow and I'm just generalizing here, but it's slow and people are trying to learn how to draw and they suck and all this stuff. Right. But as they're learning, especially optimizing their learning, which is a whole other conversation, but they're optimizing their learning, and it's never been easier to learn, obviously, with all the tools and platforms that are out there. And it comes down to just time and energy, like sets and reps, which, Arnold Schwarzenegger coined, is just a core principle of success. Like there's a sets and reps element to success. So, people want to, I think, jump past the sets and reps and just suddenly be magically gifted and skilled. It just doesn't work that way. But on the flip side, and it's something like I'm experiencing, is that the resource acquisition, which is beyond just skills, it's the whole thing. It's the money, it's the team, it's the connections, it's the technology. It's exponential, and I'm experiencing that where today I can do things that are 4 or 5 times more expensive or more complicated than I could even 3 years ago. And I expect that exponential curve to keep going. And, to be completely transparent, I was thinking about this last night, in terms of where I am compared to the true vision in my mind, I'm about 5% there, if that. So that's part of the driving force. Now, I don't feel the angst, or I don't feel less than, and the insecurities that I used to, but that's really where I feel I am. But on the flip side, I'm not discouraged by that, because I feel like there's this exponential curve that's occurring. And I think every highly driven entrepreneur or creative can hit that curve if they keep trying to build better teams, better resources, improve their skills, improve their knowledge, improve themselves. And suddenly you can do, again, 4 or 5 times what you couldn't do a couple of years ago. So, that keeps me hopeful that within 10 or 15 years, I'll be where I dreamt of being in my early 20s. And then hopefully I'll go beyond that. So that's it.
Yeah, very cool. The question that comes up for me around this is, you talked about in a couple of other podcasts that, you are much more of like a visionary, like kind of role, like you have generated a lot of ideas and that kind of thing. And you're not as much I think you did the Colby test, you're probably like lower on follow through and higher on quick start. Right. So with somebody who has that skill set, because I'm similar, like how do you like maximize that early on? Because, in theory, it's like, oh, well, you're great in a role where you can like delegate a bunch of things, but when you're starting off, you might not have a ton of resources to like delegate a bunch of stuff. So how do you kind of like maximize that early on without kind of like digging yourself into a hole of just, kind of ADHD and bouncing around everywhere and not being effective with your time?
There's a legitimate visionary chasm that I've seen a lot of visionaries struggle to cross over. Let's give everybody a couple definitions. But the best book on this topic is called Rocket Fuel.
Sure.
Highly recommend it. Super easy read. And their definitions are: a visionary, somebody that thinks big picture, typically strategic, can see the future, and typically sucks at details, sucks at micromanagement, sucks at following a system. So there's a benefit and a negative to each role or each archetype. On the other side, you have the integrator, and the integrator is somebody that typically doesn't have a lot of vision, isn't that good necessarily at creating strategy, but they're amazing at following a system, implementing a system, micromanaging if need be, et cetera, et cetera. So the combination is what creates Rocket Fuel. That's the whole premise of the book. Now, again, I tend to be friends with visionaries. I love big picture people, creative people, big idea people, strategic people. And, I've seen a lot of people, including close friends, that just have never been able to cross that chasm. And it hurts, it hurts me, because I feel like I see their potential, right? Because as visionaries, we can kind of see each other's visions if we're articulating them correctly. And yeah, it just hurts to see them struggle and never kind of build the visions that they have, because sometimes they're incredible, awesome visions. So the first piece is, I think, just being aware of what we just talked about is a game changer. Like, I spent probably the first half of my business journey not understanding that and doing a bunch of integrator things that would absolutely drain me. Okay. The cost emotionally was massive. And finally, and this was before I read Rocket Fuel, I was having lunch here in Panama with a good friend of mine, a very successful entrepreneur. And he kind of gave me the framework. He didn't have the same terms, but he gave me like, you need to get this stuff off your plate and get this type of person to take all of that off. And that kickstart this journey. And it's just been the greatest thing ever. So in a perfect world, you would, again, without having, let's say, the money to hire someone, you would partner up with someone that has all the integrator skills. So that's the free way. Obviously, it's not free because you're giving up equity. But in a perfect world, you're finding an integrator and you're giving them a piece of the company or a piece of the project, and they're going to handle that. So that's like the free, cheap way to get started. And obviously, as you get traction, you can hire people. And like on the integrator side, there's a lot of levels. So that the lowest level, it's, hiring kind of a basic assistant, and then there's like EAs and VAs, which is a life changer, So EAs, VAs could absolutely transform your life. That should be one of your first hires in general, because they can not only manage the minutia and details of the business, but they can also help on the personal side. Like I'm going on like a 16-day trip starting tomorrow. And if I had to book that, it would kill me. So like, I don't book travel anymore. Like, it would just crush me. So it's a multi-city trip. It's very, a lot of moving parts. So I don't do that anymore. And that's an example of an integrator. But then you get into project managers, and then you get into like directors. And then at the highest levels, you have like the COOs of Fortune 500 companies, guys like Tim Cook, right? So Tim Cook was, Steve Jobs' integrator, and now obviously he's become CEO. So he's transitioned over. But another piece, and I was having a great conversation with my good friend Tom Herman, wrote a great book called Alter Ego Effect. And we were talking about like the successful entrepreneurs aren't just visionaries, but they can take the vision, break it down, and understand kind of what needs to be done. It's not that they're going to do it, but I see a lot of like some visionaries, they have the vision, but they don't have the understanding yet to break down, okay, who do we need for that? What type of people do we need? What type of skill sets do they need? So they're not able to kind of assemble the team that could bring it to life. So there's a gap there that you can fill through experience or through mentorship or things like that. So anyways, it's definitely, I would say, a common struggle. And on the flip side, once you get traction and you can start afford to hire integrators, it's transformative, right? You're able to continue building more and more things and without them falling apart. Because the struggle is visionaries will have a lot of ideas and tend to be ADHD, which to me is a superpower if they can reel in the focus, right? You need hyper focus. So I think one of the discipline element for a visionary is saying, okay, I've got 100 ideas. I think 10 of them are viable. I think 3 of them are absolutely awesome, but I'm only going to do one, and I'm only going to do that one thing until it gets traction and until it starts to scale. And then maybe I'll go to idea number 2. So, I struggled a long time. And even though I was successful, I'll give you the true numbers there. So I was stuck revenue-wise with my companies at 6 to 8 million a year. That's gross revenue. I had 6 companies at the peak. And I was questioning whether or not I should hyperfocus. Okay. I was like, should I stop all this stuff and just do one thing? And as soon as I did that with BiOptimizers, which was around 3 years ago and change, we just exploded. Like we sailed past 8 figures, and if things go right, we'll be at 9 figures probably by end of next year. So, the hyper growth that's occurred through hyper focus is no accident. And you listen to Buffett or Bill Gates, they say hyper focus is one of the number one things, and it's hyper focus over a sustained period of time. Hyper focusing for a week is not hyper focus, right? So, can you maintain a hyper focus on one thing, on one project for a very long time? And, that's how great things are built.
Very cool. I'm curious with the hyper focus thing, because and maybe I'm just resistant to the idea to some degree. I find for myself is like, if I'm super hyper focused on one thing, I like energetically burn out on it. Like I will lose the love and enthusiasm that comes along with it. And what I have found, at least at this point, is like 2 or 3 projects, not like necessarily where I'm building 3 different $1 billion businesses or anything, but 2 or 3 projects where I'm doing the thing that I love in that thing, right? Where it's like with the podcast, like my main project right now is offshoring like the editing and all that stuff, because I love interviewing and I love setting up questions and doing some of the research and all that kind of stuff. But the editing process is just like this dark hole for me that can take up a ton of time, takes up energy. And then I'm also writing the book, right? And so those 2 things, and then I'm doing a little bit of like business consulting with some people on the side. That's just kind of like an exploratory thing. Do you think that there's like different levels of hyper focus, or have you always seen it that at the end of the day you got to kind of go down to one thing?
The one thing can be like one market, and obviously like within BiOptimizers, we have like 35 products in the pipeline. There's a lot of moving parts, right? We have 150
right.
employees. Like we're doing R&D on multiple things. So like the one thing for me is BiOptimizers. So like when I say one thing,
got it.
What you want to make sure, and I'll preface this with, there's an exploratory phase that I think is very valuable. Like not everybody, very few people, in fact, I think are hyper aware of their dharma. Okay. Like why are you here on earth? What are you here to do? Okay. Like in terms of the actions or the business side. So for those people, I think there's a journey of exploration, which I went through as well, right? I mean, from the age of 19 to not that long ago, I did, again, 15 different companies. There's a lot of just trying things and doing things, and health was always there. It was my first thing and it's the last thing. But I tried a lot of things, explored a lot of things, and you learn, right? So you learn what your skills are. And kind of like the true goal is to figure out, 1, what your dharma is, and 2, what your zone of genius is. Once you've got those 2 things, and zone of genius means you build the skills to the genius level. And we could kind of unpack that if you want, but that's where the magic occurs, right? That's where the greatest artists in the world live. That's where the greatest entrepreneurs in the world live. They're doing what they're supposed to be doing, and they've developed themselves to the point where they are in a zone of genius. They've given up all the things they don't like to do, the things that drain them, the things that don't create enough value, the things that someone else can do better. And the only thing that they're doing is the stuff that energizes them, charges them. Like you just mentioned, you're doing these interviews, it charges you, the editing drains you, right? So there's a constant refinement that even like I'm still going through. There's still stuff that, okay, can I give that up? Can I get rid of that? And it's just kind of an endless little thing. It gets more on the tweaking side. But that's the journey. It's like, really, how do you give up all the stuff that just doesn't energize you, that doesn't move the needle, and you just hyper focus on a few things. And it's not like say like one thing. Like you shouldn't be just doing podcasts for 12 hours a day. but
Right.
the one thing is one market. So the piece that I was
Right.
missing, the biggest mistake I made was when I had 6 different companies, there was no synergy between them. Very, very little. Sometimes I would learn something in one company that I could transfer to another, but for the most part, there was nothing that could be transferred. So now, and we call it internally the bioverse, like BiOptimizers, Utopia, and all the other things we got going on. Everything is synergizing. Like Utopia was instantly successful because of BiOptimizers. If I was launching Utopia as its
Right.
standalone company trying to get traction, it would be a struggle. You know what I mean? It'd be the same struggle as anybody else. But
Yeah.
now,
Yeah.
because we're leveraging our existing assets, and I'm gonna drop one of my favorite words, which is I'm gonna give you 3 words. These are like 3 of the most powerful forces on the planet:
Okay.
parlaying, compounding, and synergy. So parlaying means you take your wins from one event and you plug them into or reinvest them into the next event. Anybody that's sports gambling knows what parlaying is. You can do a 2-team parlay, and if the first team wins, you take the money from that first bet and it gets essentially doubled and reinvested into the second game. But
Right.
parlaying is happening all the time. Let's say, again, like I can take the lessons I've had from failures, things that didn't work, and parlay them into the next project, and now I've increased the odds of success. So parlaying is a huge part
Right.
of compounding your success. I talked about learning curves is exponential, but ideally everything you're doing is exponential. And how is it exponential? Is just through
Right.
parlaying, because what's happening is you're compounding your learning, you're compounding your money, you're compounding your resources in terms of technology, learnings, teams, people, connections, etc., and your ability to manifest bigger and bigger things just keeps growing constantly. And then
Yeah.
synergy is one of my other obsessions. So I've been obsessed with synergy ever since I learned about it in bodybuilding. I was obsessed with bodybuilding from the age of like 16 to 19. And like bodybuilders achieve like mutant-like physiques because they're just synergizing every aspect that they can. Now, we apply that principle in our product creation. So every product that we do, one of the main things we're constantly looking for and testing for in the lab now is what can we add? Can we add this cofactor that's going to increase by the effectiveness by 100% or 200%? And that's synergy. So
Nice.
synergy is like something that is as magical as it gets. And back to a partnership, like a dream partnership is you're synergizing your skill sets. You have a visionary skill set. You partner up with somebody who has integrator skill sets. And individually, you'd be struggling because you couldn't, let's say, execute on your visions, and he doesn't have a vision to execute on. But together, it's like 1 + 1 = 10. So those 3 things, parlaying, compounding gains, and synergy are like exponential levers that you want to try to create, look for, hunt, and build into your life and your business, because that's how you just start making crazy gains on all aspects.
Awesome. Well, thank you for that. That reinvigorates me because I feel like with my like one thing, it comes down to sort of, I don't know what I'm calling it exactly yet, but like my media company, if you will, with these kind of different arms that are all interconnected. And I at least feel as if they are definitely synergistic with like, the idea of the book feeding into the podcast and vice versa. And these pieces that get to complement each other and over the long haul will,
Absolutely.
I think, pay off and feed each
Yeah.
other. So thank you for that. Appreciate that. Yeah. Um, I want to take a bit of a pivot. I love all of the wisdom and the insights and all this stuff. It's been super, super valuable. And I want to kind of dive a little bit more into your personal story. And for anybody who wants to get a great summary, you can check out matgallant.tv, and he has his life journey kind of broken up into these 5 really great parts. And there is a word that you use in that 5-part series, and you've used it a couple times here, and that's the word obsession. And something that I noticed through all of that was this: you have these like phases through your life where you get, you want to call it hyper focus, whatever word you want to use, but like you have this level of obsession. And whether that was the obsession with the bodybuilding, or whether it was marketing or your partying phase, like every time you did something, it was just this hardcore 110%, like, let's see how far this kind of beast goes. And so I'm curious, like, where do you think that obsession comes from or came from? And I'm curious, do you still have that same type of obsession, or is there a different level of like relationship that you have to it now?
Comes from genetics. So there's an incredible book written by Doug Brackman called Driven. He's a Navy SEAL, retired Navy SEAL. And it's the best book I've seen on this topic. And the book is essentially about how some of us have very, very strong genes related to dopamine, which I've done my genetics and it showed up. So, it's not just an opinion or theory. It wasn't surprised. So some of us just have this genetic mutation or mutations that give us this superhuman dopamine drive. Now, when that's focused on the wrong thing, like alcohol and drugs, which was a big part of my life, it's incredibly destructive. I've been in sobriety and recovery now for 14 years. And, I started drinking when I was 12. I was sneaking and drinking my father's whiskey. And, I would drink his whiskey and replace it with water. And then he started marking the bottles, and then he kind of figured out I was drinking. So that didn't work. I had to befriend this older guy. He was of legal drinking age. He was 18. I was like 12, 13, 14. And he would buy our booze and we would get annihilated. So, again, from the age of 12, I started getting annihilated every weekend. And when I say annihilated, like, it's not an exaggeration. I never had kind of a drinking socially, let's have fun phase. Like, for me, I liked getting obliterated. It was more and more and more. And that's the nature of that dopamine drive. So drank a lot, 12, 13, 14, 15. And I was so out of control when I drank, which was the real issue, that, I discovered weed, and that was like a huge upgrade. I mean, socially, I was like, I went from being an animal, a maniac, to being at least somewhat sociable. So switched over to weed, and then my obsession also switched to bodybuilding. So 16, discovered bodybuilding, kind of became addicted to the feeling of growth. And that's still something that I would say I'm very hooked on, is growth. And now the growth comes more from the business growth and, different elements growing. Yeah. But I'm definitely hooked on growth. And at that time, it was muscle growth, and went from like 147 to 235 in 3 years. It was just very addictive. Like, seeing your muscles grow, and using the tape and the scale growing, like, all of it was very addictive. So I didn't drink and drug during that time, and then at 19, competed once, and then went and drank 19 shooters at the bar that had to carry me out that night. And then in my 20s, went back to weed, and that progressed. It progressed to the point where by my like mid to late 20s, I was chronic. When I'm living in Vancouver, I was smoking like a quarter ounce a day of Vancouver's finest, which is very strong weed, and got into the party scene deep. And it was disco biscuits and other drugs. every weekend, and we wouldn't sleep for 3 days. It was just wrecking ourselves. So
Wow.
yeah, and that went on, and then I moved to Panama at 28, and that went on. I partied for another 4 years, so I was off the rails for about 5 years. Like
Wow.
28, when I got divorced, is really where the brakes came off, and I just went off the rails for 5 years, and then hit bottom at 32, and yeah, it's been it's going to be 14 years of sobriety. So yeah, it's just been a great journey.
Wow.
Sobriety's been awesome. I've been loving it, love the mental clarity, and I feel like I've been able to, manifest my potential. Like back then when I drank and drugged, my pattern was get momentum and then destroy my momentum, and then build momentum and destroy it. It was just this self-destructive pattern that kept me stuck for a long time. So,
Where do you think that like pattern came from for you? Was that like coming out of some sort of a trauma? Was it just not knowing how to handle it? Was it like you were just going to a point of burnout and then your nervous system couldn't handle it, so it needed this break? Like, what was that kind of stemming from?
it's a great question. So I'm going to go deep here. So
Yeah, please.
I think for the majority of my life, I've had a malaise, a discomfort with myself. And it was unconscious for the majority of my life. And I think that drove a lot of the drinking and drugging. So that pattern was, sometimes I would spend like 6-9 months without drinking and drugging, but I was thinking about it. I was obsessing about it in my own mind. In the program, we say we're white knuckling it. White knuckling means you're not drinking and drugging, but you're thinking about it. You're kind of squeezing the chair so hard that you're getting white knuckles. And then I would pop off and just go off the rails until I would hit the next speed bump and rinse and repeat. So even when I wasn't drinking and drugging, I was not at peace with myself. I wasn't at peace with who I was. And it was through, the 12 steps, which now I think they're in over 100 programs. It's just an amazing program that has transformed, tens of millions of lives and all kinds of things, not just drinking and drugging, but, hundreds of things.
Yeah.
There's a transformation that occurs as you go through that process. So the process is essentially you realize that your life's out of control and you're paying the price, right? The unmanageability piece. And that can take many shapes and forms, right? And I think a lot of people, their lives are unmanageable and they're not realizing it. And unmanageability can be financial, can be social, can be their jobs, can be their relationships, can be their health. Like there's all kinds of shapes and forms for unmanageability, right? But essentially, there's a consequence that's occurring because of whatever this thing is, right? So just realizing that and accepting that you can't stop that thing. And that's really where addiction is. It's, you have a compulsion, there's an obsession, a compulsion. It's beyond, it's like an obsession compulsion. You just cannot stop once you start. And, as soon as I would start drinking, I never had like one drink. Normal people can have one drink and they're fine, right? I'm not in that group.
Yeah.
So, but that's just the beginning. And then, realizing and believing that there's a higher power and then surrendering to that higher power. And then starts the inner work. Like that's just the warm up. Okay. Then comes the work. Right. Which, to be honest, I feel like Biocybernaut, 40 Years of Zen, kind of does that on steroids. Like I feel, honestly, that 40 Years of Zen and Biocybernaut are better at the inner work. It's a better process than what AA does. Like AA is very thorough, but you're not really cleaning house emotionally. What you do is you create this massive inventory of all your fears, all your anger, all the things you've done to people. And, you get to take responsibility for those things. And it reduces a lot of the resentments and the fears around those things by going through that process. But I don't feel you're completely cleaning out the limbic system as thoroughly as you are doing neurofeedback or doing some of these other healing modalities, right? So you do that, but when you put everything on paper, and they've got really good forms. If you just Google like Step 4 AA forms, you can find them. It's really good tools. Cool. What you realize is you start seeing, and now we're getting to the core of it. You start seeing character defects. That's what they call them. Shortcomings, whatever you want to call them, it's all the same thing. But these are character traits that people build typically as either self-defense mechanisms they picked up because of the traumas, or it's cultural things they picked up, or things they picked up as parents. But these are character traits that are fundamentally a net negative. Okay. So you start seeing the pattern. I'm self-centered. I'm spiteful. I'm an extremist. I'm all of these things, right? Like my list was like 35 things long and growing. And that's where, when you start working on these things, you get to a point where you start liking yourself and then loving yourself, right? It's like first you become aware of yourself, including all the parts you hate. Then you work on them, you work on accepting them, and then you work on, then it evolves into liking, and then it just works into you love yourself unconditionally, like all of it. And that was an experience I had, I think, during my third or fourth 40 years of Zen, where I just kind of got in touch with this part of me, this nurturing side that just loved myself unconditionally. And I think once you get to the point where you love yourself unconditionally, you lose those self-destructive patterns. And I think a lot of those self-destructive patterns are just driven by character defects mostly. They're driven by wanting to escape because you don't like who you are. So there's some form of escape that's being called to. So yeah, I think that's my take on what was going on there.
Yeah, well, thank you for sharing that. I think that I resonated a lot with that. Like, I think one of my big self-love moments was actually kind of going back to the EDM and festivals thing. Was I was at Base Canyon, and I was on I think 2 tabs of acid, just kind of seeing the finale performance, and I had this like huge like cathartic like ego dissolution, self-love experience where it was just like all of a sudden I had this deep level of appreciation for essentially like fathering myself over the last like decade and a half, right? After, my dad was arrested when I was around like 16, and just it was like my life was like in replay, and I was seeing, all of the different choices I had made, the challenges, the hardships, the things. And it was like all that had led me to like that moment where, I was, had a great job. I was at this amazing performance. I had made new friends. Like I had this ability to kind of navigate people all sorts on all sides of various political spectrums and different things. And it was like, I just finally had this deep level of self-love and catharsis. But I think to your point, it comes from like all of that other work that you do to kind of get to that point, right? Whether it's AA or whether it's 40 years of Zen and Biocybernaut or therapy or whatever elements of it. And I'm still, I feel like, on that journey of self-love and learning to love different parts of myself that I'm like, oh, I don't really like that, but learning to, tolerate it at first and then develop that more of that skill set. I guess I'm curious for you, like as you've done so much this work and you have a lot of wisdom, you've obviously grown a shit ton. Like for someone who is, they maybe hear the idea of self-love, and this is something that I've come to more recently, is like a lot of times people are just like, oh, like love yourself. And it's like this very abstract concept. Like if you're kind of breaking that down into like some sort of a tangible, I want to say steps or process or a system, or like, what does that mean to actually love yourself, and how do you start doing that?
It's a great question.
Thanks.
Yeah, I think you want to start by really making a deep, thorough inventory of, again, all this is where the AA process is really good. Like just kind of creating an inventory of all the things that have hurt you, all the fears. I'm a believer that cleaning your limbic system will transform your life. And it's coming from experience from, again, having done 8 brain trainings. I'm at the point now where it's not that there's nothing left, but it's hard to find things. Like, you know what I mean? Like I've done like 500 rounds of cleaning something.
Right.
I clean things in real time now. Like let's say somebody says something that hurts me, I'll go tapping. Like I'm a big fan of EFT. People that aren't familiar with EFT, Google EFT tapping or search in YouTube. You can find it. It's a really easy, highly effective tool that allows you to re-experience or experience pain and then shift your nervous system to the parasympathetic side. So the axiom of healing is the following, in my opinion. You reactivate the pain, the discomfort, and then while holding the sensation, and sensation is a key word, you're not playing the movie, you're not mentating, you're not trying to analyze it. You're focusing on the somatic sensation in your body, and then you shift your nervous system into parasympathetic, and you process that. And I think that's what's occurring with the neurofeedback, EMDR, EFT, you name it. It's essentially the same process, just using different techniques. So, there's a lot of things that I know that I've done that at one point in my life, I hated myself. I hated who I was. I hated the pain that I'd caused other people. And I had to clear those things. Like, I don't think there was a path to loving myself without clearing, eliminating, processing those events. And again, I was at the point during my bottom, which I had never experienced before, which was true self-loathing. Like I hated who I was, hated who I'd become, hated what I'd done to other people. And, it took me being on the journey. And, there's another side to it as well, which I think to feel self-esteem, which I think is a big part of self-love, is you need to do esteemable acts. Self-esteem isn't free. You can't really fool yourself into self-esteem. So when you do good things, and good things means a million things, whether it's, being true to your word, working, doing valuable things, being productive. One of the reasons why I'm obsessed with values, it gives me self-esteem, right? Like, when you create values for other people, you feel good. They feel good. You feel good. Like it's a really powerful self-esteem builder. Working out, taking care of your body, all of those things, I think help you on the journey. But I think ultimately, to get to the place of like unconditional love, right? So if we look at the Hawkins map of consciousness, there's love, which is at 500, and then unconditional is at 540. That's a big gap. So I think the journey is like people first need to get to the point of love, which is a journey in itself. And then there's this perfectioning of self-love, which I think one of the paths is to keep surrendering all forms of self-judgment. Like if you think about the word unconditional love, another, I think, synonym is it's love without judgment. And, if you're just constantly surrendering all the parts of yourself that you're judging yourself for, all the things from the past or things you might be doing in the now, I think that's a big part of it. But doing self-destructive behavior, it's going to be hard. Like again, if you're trapped in one of the places like where I was in a loop of self-destructive behaviors, I don't think unconditional love was possible in that place. I had to escape that self-destructive loop and then start the process of healing. Like if I was doing the things I was doing back then,
Yeah.
I'd probably be in the same place emotionally that I was, despite having done all the work. So yeah, it's a journey. It's tough.
Yeah.
It's hard. Is it worth it? Absolutely. I think it's probably like the greatest thing a human being can do is get themselves to a place of unconditional love and beyond, because then you're going to be sharing that gift with everyone in your life, your friends, your family, etc., and they're going to be getting that energy. So another take on value,
Mm-hmm.
and this is the value that is shared through human interaction, is the value of level of consciousness, which is an invisible thing, but everybody feels it, right? You have an encounter with someone,
Mm-hmm.
whether it's a 10-second transaction at a convenience store or a 2-hour dinner, there's energy that's invisible that's transferred. And what energy are you transferring? Are you transferring the energy of unconditional love and a good vibe to that person? Or, most people are transferring a, angry, frustrated, fearful energy, and they're not even aware of it. That's the sad part. So.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you for that. I think with what you just kind of went with there, I want to get into actually David Hawkins and spirituality and stuff in a moment, but there's one other question I wanted to ask you about sort of your own journey with this, and that is, you mentioned this sort of angst that you had as a youngster, if you will, and this, you related it also to this idea of like, who were you? And it sounds like there was almost a sense of like not fitting in. And I'm curious of like, and you might not know, or maybe you do, like, was that something that just you think came out of just being born a little genetically different and being different from the people around you, and having that? Was there something else that kind of created that sense of separation? And part of why I want to preface that question is, that's something that I think I have definitely dealt with, and at various points in my life, I know I dealt with insecurities of feeling, stupid or out of place, because I would have a teacher that like wouldn't understand questions that I could ask them, at a younger age, or think about things differently. And there's a quote from Joseph Campbell, who wrote the hero's journey and a lot of that stuff. And he says, like, the hero and the neurotic are the same person. The difference is that the hero makes the vision that they have in the world a reality, and the neurotic is overcome by their vision and destroys them. Is that something that like kind of what you resonated with it, or was it like something different that you were dealing with?
Yeah, there's like two questions there. I realized I felt different, and again, I felt different for the first time in grade 2. I remember I was like I was rapid firing questions to the teacher, and I was like the only kid in my class asking questions. And I remember feeling awkward about it. Like, am I weird? Why is no one else asking questions? So like that was the first moment I can recall feeling different than other people. And yeah, I felt like that the majority of the time, all through school, throughout high school, and yeah, even university. University was better. It was better in a lot of ways, but it's only, I've only feel like I found my tribe once I went global. And global meaning like friends throughout Canada, friends throughout the US, and friends globally. But I think that's the power of the internet. Is now, first of all, everybody's got. I'm going to go on a tangent here. It's a marketing tangent, but it's a human nature tangent. So we're all hardwired to be part of a tribe. It's genetically wired because it assured our survival. Being alone in the caveman days, in the tribal days, wasn't a very good place to be, right? So obviously there's a lot of benefits being part of a tribe for
Mhm.
food reasons, for safety reasons, etc. So it's hardwired. And I think a lot of us feel separated and alone until we find a group of people. We're like, okay, this is my tribe. Maybe for you it's EDM. I certainly felt like that when I arrived in the 12 steps programs. Like, okay, and even
Mhm.
within that group, there was obviously people I really, really bonded with, and they've become incredibly close best friends, right? So I didn't bond with everybody deeply, but I
Mhm.
did feel like that was my tribe. And then even on the business side, I feel like my tribes is people that are, living their dharma, which is a small subset of entrepreneurs. Most entrepreneurs are building a business to have a good life, to have a great life, to retire, to do whatever. And there's nothing wrong with that. I'm not judging that at all, but that's just not who I am. So, I'm going to relate and connect with people that are, purpose, mission driven, that don't, ready to go until they die
Mhm.
on their journey. So, yeah, it's been a struggle and a journey to find those tribes. Like, it wasn't back to the village and that
Mhm.
small minded feeling, like it wasn't there. I felt like an alien
Yeah.
in that community, and yeah, I think
Mhm.
when you have extraordinary levels of drive, first of all, that makes you very unique. And again, it's hard to relate to people that don't have that, right? So I was surrounded with people that don't have it.
Mhm.
Like, there's no one in my family that's entrepreneurial. Like, I've got 10 uncles
Mhm.
and aunts on both sides. So yeah, there was no one to really bond with or be mentored by, and I think that just really amplified the angst. I felt alone essentially, and the only way I could see the light at the end of the tunnel was through books and courses. I was investing all the money I was making into
Mhm.
business books and marketing courses and copywriting courses, and then I started going to
Mhm.
events. And I think going to events was a real turning point. I started being able to afford events in my early 20s, and that's where you start meeting
Mhm.
your tribe. You connect with people and meeting other
Mhm.
copywriters and marketers, and the fact that everybody got on a plane and went to an event creates creates a bond. And a lot of these people are still my good friends today. So
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, I've found that the internet has just been huge for not just myself, but for so many people. It's like if you're into some sort of niche thing, you now have a community. You don't have to have five friends who are right next to you. You can just find them on the internet, and I think it's such a powerful tool for connection. I feel like I don't know. One of my little pet peeves is I feel like technology, with whatever it is, always ends up being like lambasted and put down for whatever reason. Like, the internet creates all these problems, or social media creates all these problems. Like, yeah, and there's also all these really wonderful things
absolutely.
that happen from it, if we kind of shift our lens a little bit. So yeah, thank you for that. Um, yeah, I wanted to shift over to spirituality and David Hawkins, who I know that is he was really really big in your life. I guess for the audience and even my sake, like, could you give us a little primer on David Hawkins, who he is, and like what he means to you?
Sure. Yeah, I'll quickly cover my religious spiritual journey. So, raised Catholic. Um, I would say I was like a devoted Catholic early in my life. I mean, I used to go to the front
Mm.
of the church, like the closest seats to the priest. My mom was a bit embarrassed; she'd sit back. I was alone by myself and was kind of attracted to it all and wanted to be a priest until I learned that they couldn't get married. I'm like, okay, I'm not doing that. Um,
Mm.
so then, when I was around 13, I just started becoming really curious about everything and started reading a lot of books. And in my teenage
Mm.
years, became an atheist. I remember looking at the sky and saying, "Yeah, we don't need a God. There's no God." And I just like shifted my whole mindset instantly. It was like just
Wow.
in a moment, an instant. And yeah, became a pretty hardcore, devoted atheist for many years. I mean, I used to love debating religious believers and just dismantling their arguments. And I got into
Hmm.
that rabbit hole, which was honestly not a good thing. I would create a lot of emotional turmoil for these people. It was not a good thing in retrospect. Anyways, and then over the years, like mid-20s, still atheists. And then Wade, and I'm going to give Wade all the credit here. Wade was, fiercely spiritual. And we used to have these debates. I mean, we argued. Like, Wade was a great opponent because, none of us kind of gave up, right? We would just keep going and going. And, politely but intensely debated for many years. And then he gifted me The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle. Read the book, really resonated with the book on so many levels. First of all, I love the fact he's like, okay, I'm not going to use God in the book. I'm like, okay, I can read this. Great. And then when he talked about being addicted to thinking, it just hit home. I just realized how addicted to thinking I was. And, really started to become more present at times and just started kind of discovering the power of now and the power of just being. So that was transformative, just going from being like addicted to thinking my own mind all the time to being able to take a walk around a lagoon and just be and watch the ducks and enjoy the ducks. It was, I didn't know it at the time, but it was massive spiritual growth. And then he gifted me Power versus Force, which was Hawkins' first book. And again, read the book. Hawkins did not use the word God once in Power versus Force. And I just absolutely resonated with what Hawkins was saying. I felt like his map of consciousness was the greatest framework I've ever seen. And I still feel like that today. Like, I've never seen a better framework for humanity, for just the human condition, than the map of the scale of consciousness, which is this map that he built. And keep in mind, he was a psychiatrist for a long time and a super genius. And I believe, based on many, many things, that he was enlightened as well. So he built a system of muscle testing, which is a whole other rabbit hole we can get into, but essentially built this scale through muscle testing, and obviously had his whole background of experience where the bottom of the scale is like shame. It goes from shame, guilt, apathy, sadness, fear, addiction, desire, anger, pride, and then there's a turning point energetically at 200, which is courage. So at courage, everything changes energetically. And then you go from courage to neutrality to willingness to acceptance. And that's why, like, acceptance, when you get to acceptance, is energetically transformative. Like, if you go from being frustrated to something to acceptance, that's a massive jump in level of consciousness instantly, if you can get there. And that's the power of the serenity prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. I mean, I've done that prayer thousands of times, I think. And, especially when I'm struggling with whatever life is throwing at me, that prayer to me is a tool. And it helps me, again, accept the things I can't change and go to acceptance with those things, and then give me the courage and the strength to just work on the things that I've got control on. So incredible tool. And then after that, in the 400s, you have reason and intellect and, super genius, if you will, is in the high 400s, 499. And then there's that energetic turning point at 500, which is love. And, when you get to love, life transforms. It's not just a different level or a higher level. Life is fundamentally different, and back to tribes, like my tribe is people in the 500s and beyond. Like I love hanging out with people that are there because you just get energized, right? Like when you're hanging out with somebody that's resonating at a loving frequency, it just feels awesome, and then the higher they are, the more awesome it feels to be around them. Unconditional love at 540, bliss at 560, ecstasy at 580. And then when I say ecstasy, not just talking about the drug will get you there. So the drug will essentially block everything below that frequency, and you're experiencing 580. So anybody who's done enough MDMA will attest to that experience. Is that possible naturally? Yes, it is. Does it take a massive amount of spiritual growth and experience and get into very special states to be able to experience it? Yes. So it's not easy, but doable. And enlightenment on Hawkins scale begins at 600 and then progresses from there. And he's cataloged a lot of those high level states in a couple of his books. One is Transcending the Levels of Consciousness, where he literally kind of walks you through all the stages I just mentioned, including a detailed breakdown of what it's like at various levels of enlightenment, which is really fascinating. And then they just came out with another book recently called The Map of the Scale of Consciousness, which kind of covers the whole gamut as well. So yeah, it was transformative. Again, I read the first book and he didn't use the word God. And I'm sold. Like, I'm just loving what I'm hearing on so many levels. He talked about what genius was like and how genius worked. And he also talked about AA. It happened that I think when he passed away, he had 50 years of sobriety, which was awesome. But yeah, he planted a lot of incredible seeds that took fruit later on. And then I read all his other books, and that's what converted me back into spirituality. Like, second book, The Eye of the Eye, which was probably the most transformative book for me ever spiritually. Like, how can I say this? It recalibrates your ego in incredibly healthy ways and at a level I haven't really experienced from another book before. So yeah, that was it. And then continued drinking and drugging. And part of my bottom was this spiritual dissonance where I wanted conscious contact. I wanted to be connected to a higher power. And when I drank and drug, I felt disconnected. And that pain of being disconnected from my higher power just kept getting more and more intense. So that was a huge part of it. I mean, yeah, there was other reasons, but the spiritual pain, the spiritual cost was massive. And then got sober and just completely embraced the spiritual side of the program. I had a really good spiritual sponsor. Got into the Course of Miracles, which I've done like 7 or 8 times, which is an amazing tool.
Wow.
You just basically do the lessons, like daily lessons for 365 days. And that was transformative as well. And obviously did AA, which is a spiritual program. That was transformative. So it was just back to stacking and synergy, as we mentioned earlier. I was just stacking every spiritual program that I resonated with. And then obviously things went to another level like 8 years ago when I started Biocybernaut, went to 40 years of Zen. And, those to me are functional, emotional, spiritual transformers. And when I say functional, like your brain's ability to function, reading speed, processing speed, lateral, cross-lateral thinking, like all of those things will improve. But in a lot of ways, the more profound gains are EQ, emotional growth, which happens, I think, naturally as you clean house on the limbic system. And then spiritually, as you discover these profound states and you've let go of a lot of the things kind of weighing you down. Like, one of my mental models for consciousness is it's like a helium balloon and everybody's got rocks. So as you clip the rocks away, your helium balloon is going to get higher and higher. And obviously the other way to get higher and higher is to just pump more helium in it. And that happens through spiritual, processes, meditation, dancing, music, neurofeedback, etc. So to me, it's kind of a dual process of, hey, let's remove or get rid of all the things holding us down, and let's keep pumping more and more helium so we can get as high as possible.
Yeah. Awesome. That's great. I'm curious with the with your comments around like the drugs and alcohol, like creating the spiritual dissonance and pain for you, do you, in your own opinion, do you think that like I was like different people are just based on their genetics or experiences just relate to certain things differently? And the reason I ask is because I know that obviously like drugs are still, whether it's peyote or whether it's LSD or whatever, a lot of people can use those for these spiritual kind of highs, or connecting more to that versus less. Even alcohol, actually, like a lot of monasteries are also breweries that have been around for hundreds of years and things of that nature, where they were using beer to connect more so to the divine. But that kind of thing, do you feel like it's just kind of different for different people, or how do you kind of relate to that or see that?
I'll give you like my personal take. First of all, I think obviously there's certain drugs that are, in my opinion, net absolutely destructive things that ideally nobody would ever do. There's some really dangerous drugs that are very low calibrating that will bring people down very fast. So, I think avoiding those is a really smart idea. Then I think there's some other things that for some people might be okay to a certain degree. And I think like alcohol is one of them. Like certain people might, like myself, obviously like alcohol was always a net negative. It was an absolute destructor of things. Some people can drink 1 or 2 glasses of wine and then they're fine, But my take is, at this point, I don't want to take anything that causes any sort of net negative in any area of my life. So that means that the next day, if my brain isn't as sharp as it was the day before, or if my body's compromised on any level, to me, that's a net negative. So I only want to take molecules that are net positive, meaning that there's no lingering effect, there's zero hangover, there's no compromise happening in my body or in my brain. That's my standards. And obviously there's certain plants that are, I think, almost like nootropics. I think psilocybin, for an example, to me is more like a nootropic at the lower doses. Macro doses, completely different story. And having talked to a lot of people in the space, like I know people that own clinics in the space and that are pioneers.
Yeah.
The general take is that they can help people become aware of things that they're not aware of. And we can get into, Dr. David Hawkins mentioned that when people have, this is a really kind of a mind blower and explains a lot of things. He said that when people have an area of their life that's below 200, in other words, it's out of integrity, that by nature and definition, it's a blind spot. So, and I look back in my life, and like probably the most baffling thing about the time where I drank and drug and did all kinds of crazy things and hurt a lot of people was how blind I was, how deep in denial I was to the damage I was creating. Like absolutely mind-boggling to me at this point. Like I look back, I'm like, how did I not see that? Like, why did it take me 20 years to realize the damage I was creating? It's like, I can't, but then I remember, I was sub 200 in those areas. I was sub 200 in a lot of areas. And by definition, it was a blind spot and I couldn't see it. So I think one of the first big benefits of a lot of the, ayahuasca, which I did actually 4 times before I hit my bottom. And as an interesting side note, and this kind of relates to what I'm saying, the night before I hit my bottom, and I'll talk a little bit about the bottom in a sec, I did ayahuasca. So I did ayahuasca the night before. And then the next day, we were doing other drugs. And I did things that not proud of, that we'll skip for this podcast, but I got woken up at like 5:30 a.m. by the owner of the house, and I just was absolutely dismantled for what felt like 2 hours. She just categorically
Wow.
dismantled my ego. And what happened, and I do believe that the ayahuasca contributed to that, was that dam of denial that I just mentioned broke. And I just saw and felt like all of the pain and suffering that I'd caused all these people for years and years, from my parents, my friends, etc. And that pain was so intense. That's when I went into self-loathing. And, there's a term in the program, which is like the gift of desperation. And that's when the pain is so high, the emotional pain is so high that you are willing to do absolutely anything to get out of it. And that's where I was. So did the ayahuasca play a role in that dam of denial breaking? I think so. I really do. And again, I've talked to people that are professionals in this space, and their opinions is, it helps people bring up a lot of things that are buried very deep within their subconscious. But there's another piece of it, which relates to kind of some of the earlier conversations we were having, which they also say that that's when the real work begins after you've kind of experienced whatever it is you've experienced. It's come up to the surface. Okay, now go do EMDR. Now go do neurofeedback. Go do, tapping, EFT, whatever, to go process those things effectively, because the awareness of it is only the beginning. You haven't really done the work yet. So,
Yeah. I resonate with that a lot. And I almost want to, for myself at least, find that like it's almost a step further, where it's one thing to have the awareness, and because even I feel like the growth that I've gotten from Zen, where there's a lot of that cleaning of the limbic system, until I'm in relationship with people again, where there is that actual like reconditioning of me being like, oh, like I'm actually going to be operating differently. I'm going to show up differently. Until I have that, for me at least, it doesn't feel like it actually cements. And that's even where like my journey of going to all these shows and concerts has been, especially because I kind of like, had a lot of my own personal growth sort of on that Zen level, if you will, during COVID. And so I wasn't really interacting with that many people. Right. And then all of a sudden it was like, I was at a conference, I was at concerts, and all of a sudden it was like, oh, my limbic system that is adjusted has the opportunity to like grow and like build in these new ways of being over time. And that's for me, whereas like the hard work, if you want to get into astrology, kind of the Saturn level of work comes in, of making that like physical and tangible and mathematical, if you will.
Yeah, something to what I heard there is like you reset your default mode network and you're able to consciously build new patterns. And especially like psilocybin and ketamine are really, really good at resetting the default mode network, which is essentially the mental structure of our ego. And you can train some of that as well during brain training, and train the executive network and all of these things. But I think that's one of the values of some of these compounds is they basically click the reset button and allow you to look at your life, and you're out of the OCD loops, and you're out of whatever patterns that you typically would be in. And you're like, okay, well, do I want to keep doing that pattern? Should I keep doing that pattern? Do I want to build a new pattern? What new habits do I want to build? Do I want to build a new alter ego? Do I want to build new personality traits? And there's just this fresh canvas that you can build upon. So I think that's another big value that can come, again, if it's used appropriately by the right people in the right context.
Yeah. I mean, I agree. I think with me, sort of the point that I was wanting to get to is I think of this, I think it's like a Zen parable where there's like a monk who goes off into a cave for 5 years to meditate on patience, and then comes out and he's walking down the road and somebody cuts him off and he starts cursing at him, yelling down the road. And, obviously there's that sort of this idea of, it's one thing to do it in the cave, right? And there's another thing to do it in reality. And I find like, we can do all the inner work in the world, and if we're not actually like going out and experiencing and being confronted with those things in, the day to day, then it's, I think we're missing the point sometimes, I guess.
Yeah, I feel like one of the greatest values of like a romantic relationship where you're living together is you can't hide your character defects. Everybody's, of course, has the honeymoon phase, the oxytocin's pumping the first 12 months. Once that wears off and you start living together and people start feeling comfortable enough to truly be themselves, and they start revealing these shortcomings, or they're just behaving in certain ways where the other person doesn't like it or hurts the other person, there's so much growth there. There's so much growth. And, I think one of my North Stars as a human being, again, I'm going to credit the program for this, and my father as well, my father is hardwired this way, is I want to try to reduce self-seeking and self-centeredness as much as humanly possible. Now, there's a big difference between selfishness and self-centeredness, and very few people understand the difference. Selfishness means you're thinking about yourself, which obviously we have to, right? You have to think about eating, drinking, going to the bathroom. Like, it's unescapable. Self-centered means, or self-absorbed means, I'm only thinking about myself. So you can be selfish and be thinking about other people all the time. And, one of my goals is just to constantly be of service more and more, thinking of people more and more, helping people more and more. And, that's one of like my best tools, like my best ways to recalibrate a lot of my character defects, because most of my character defects can be basically boiled down to it's self-centered and it's self-seeking. Like, I'm doing those things because I'm self-absorbed and I'm self-seeking, and that's the nature of it. So the antidote to that is, how can I be of service, help people, and do all those things? And, there's a limits, right? I have a limited amount of time, a limited amount of energy. So it's within boundaries. And I think that's part of the process, as well as, some people become so giving that they just completely deplete themselves and they become compromised. But yeah, I think that's a key part of the value you get from a relationship, because obviously if you're self-centered, self-seeking in a relationship's not going to last that long. And again, back to growth, right? I mentioned earlier, I'm just hooked on growth. So one of the best ways to grow is to just put yourself in environments that essentially cause you to grow. And relationships, one of them. Business partnerships is another one of them. Going to brain training is another one of them. Like, if you put yourself in certain environments where like you have no choice, you're going to grow. Yeah, you can't not grow. I'm a big fan of that. Like, I think environment's stronger than will. And one of my business mentors, Eben Pagan, talked about the power of inevitability, like inevitability thinking, crafting your environment where success is inevitable. What would that look like? Like, put some thought into it, pen and paper, and what would it look like? What would your office look like? Who would be in your office? Who would be in your life? Who is your partner, etc. And you kind of start crafting the people, and you start broadcasting that signal. And one of the things we didn't touch upon, which I think is one of the biggest values of Biocybernaut 4 years of Zen meditation, is I believe that, and this is a Hawkins line, what you hold in mind tends to manifest. He says that calibrates at 505. And I believe that the majority of my success has come from holding those things in mind. And I could give you a dozen examples of just mind-blowing things that have occurred. And we've actually structured that within BiOptimizers. So BiOptimizers, every 2 weeks, we have a Monday call. And at the end of the call, we do the following. We go through the 3-year or 10-year or kind of like 25-year vision. We pick one of them. We go through the vision for a couple minutes, and then literally the entire company meditates for 1 minute. And the meditation is hold this in mind. And I believe, and I've talked to a couple of neuroscientists, including one that you know, and they all believe that the more people hold the same thing in mind, that it exponentially amplifies that signal, which then magnetically draws in the right people, the right circumstances, the right whatever. So what people call luck, to me, there's no luck. It's karma, and it's basically holding those things in mind. And I think that's the power of learning to get into some alpha and theta states. Like I love getting into a deep theta state and just broadcasting all of my visions, and also listening for downloads. I think it's just an incredible tool.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you for sharing all that. We're almost at time.
Sure.
Do you have time for like one more deep question? All right, cool. So, in reading your story, which again, thank you for sharing all that. I think there's so much great depth for anybody who wants to check that out. You talk about, I believe it's Christoph Klepton. Is that how you pronounce it? Yeah, Klexton. And you talk about when you go through, I think you're starting to learn how to fight, and you develop that, and you used some level of the phrase of like, and that was sort of when you felt like you became a man. And I'm curious, like, what was it about that you feel like brought you into manhood at that point?
Yeah, so I was bigger. Like I grew really fast as a kid. I was like a foot taller than almost everyone except one other guy. I'm only around 5'10" now, so I'm not that tall. But grade 1 kindergarten, and then grade 6, 7, 8, a lot of people started passing me by. And long story short, 2 guys bullied me for a couple of years, and I hated that feeling. I felt helpless, felt fear, like on a daily basis in the bus, in school. A lot of verbal and physical abuse. And yeah, I hated the feeling. It was a feeling of fear. I was scared of heights. That was some like baby trauma. So as a baby, I don't remember this, but I was, I think, 6 or 9 months old. I was months, and I fell down. Like one story, my aunt was babysitting me, and I was knocked out. I mean, they hit a floor of cement. She thought I was dead. Wow. I was knocked out. Yeah. And what was wild is, as I was growing up, I dreamt of that feeling, like that falling feeling. So that was probably some somatic trauma from the feeling of falling. It's like I had nightmares. I probably had that nightmare like 100 times for many, many years of falling and then hitting the floor, and I would just wake up. So terrified of heights, scared of getting beat up by bigger guys. I mean, those were really real fears. And then, I bought the tapes. Clarkson, I got this wild sales letter in the mail, which, by the way, interesting little footnote. The guy that wrote that sales letter became my copywriting mentor. His name's John Carlton. So he was an amazing copywriter. Wrote this sales letter about this guy that goes to a rave in Tulsa and rubs the head of 3 neo-Nazi skinheads and says, "Hey, nice haircut, buddy." They corner him. He beats the living crap out of the 2 first guys, and the 3rd guy runs. So I bought his tapes, and I was just, that became my next obsession. Like I went from bodybuilding to hand-to-hand combat. And I started training by myself. I brought my friend in, and we trained like daily for a year. And it really felt like discovering programs you would download from the Matrix. Like I'd done some martial arts as a kid, but this was like, holy shit, this is the keys. This is the holy grail. This is like the real stuff. And it is the real stuff. And I just got hooked on that. I got hooked on the growth, the nervous system, programming, learning, all of that. And then I reached out to him. I was still in university. I think I was in my second year, probably. Reached out to him and I said, hey, would love to train with you. What does that look like? And he said, yeah, here's my fees. You can fly to Tulsa, train here. And I couldn't afford it. I remember the plane ticket alone was like $2,500 and all this stuff. And I said, how much would you charge to come to Moncton and do seminars here? So he gave me his fee and I did the math and I'm like, well, if I get like 10, 15 people, I can basically break even. And that was my goal. So brought him over. I hustled my ass off, and peddled a lot of fear. Sold a lot of fear to a lot of people. And was able to get enough people to break even. And yeah, I think we ended up doing like 35 seminars over a 6-7 year period. I would fly him to Moncton, Canada, and train with them for many years. But to your question, there was a turning point and it felt epigenetic, okay? Like it really felt like a switch where I went from feeling fear to, and I'm going to put an asterisk on this, but to almost feeling fearless. Where, I mean, I would challenge guys to fights in the gym because they were insulting my friend. I mean, I was just ready for combat. Again, not a good thing, and kind of got lost in a violent mindset, which is why I stopped training eventually and almost started fighting professionally, all this stuff. It would have been probably a dark place for me to be in. So I feel like I got saved by grace there, pulled out of it. But yeah, there was definitely a switch. And I also jumped out of a plane to conquer the fear of heights. And that felt like another epigenetic switch. Like I was never as scared again of heights. So there's something that seems to happen when, and I've talked to SEALs about this, where you face the fear, and if you face it enough and you face it at enough depth, your body, your brain just switches something and you don't really fear it anymore. You respect it. And to give you an example, one of my clients that I was building training programs for in Moncton was part of the SWAT team. So one day he invited me to go do rappelling off of a building. So we're on top of a building, okay? Building is probably like 12 stories tall. And it was like a special tower that they used to train in. And it would train like all kinds of crazy things. And the squad commander comes to me and says, what are you feeling right now? I said, I'm feeling something. And obviously was feeling, anxiety and butterflies and all kinds of things because I'm about to jump off a building. And he says, yeah, what you're feeling is a healthy respect for heights. So, I've come to understand that when I feel that butterfly, and I think anxiety is not the right word, but it's a similar energy. And I feel excited, I'm doing the right thing. Like if I feel an excitement and a little bit of fear, I think that typically, almost always in my case at least, like that's the right thing to do. I should embrace that, feel the fear and do it anyways. And I think feel the fear and do it anyways becomes a hardwired pattern by just doing that over and over again, right? And that's how you develop warrior spirit, where you're bypassing thinking. Thinking becomes the enemy in so many situations. Like you got a cold bath in front of you, there's no thinking, right? Like the more you think about, oh, I'm going to freeze my ass off, I'm going to shiver, it's cold, like you're just talking your way out of it. Same thing out of a workout. I can talk my way mentally out of a workout, but I've just learned to just not think and do. And Mel Robbins, I think, does a great job kind of teaching people that. She has like the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 thing. But Yeah, I think that just hardwiring your brain to just effing go when you feel those anxieties, and just you start hardwiring and it just becomes who you are.
Yeah. Awesome. And so I guess because you use the specific language, like became a man, I'm curious, like what about, was it about like overcoming your ability to overcome your fears that like had that sense of like, now I'm a man? And I want to dovetail that into a second question, which is like, how has, or like, how do you define what it means to be a man, and how has that definition maybe changed from where you were then to where you are
I
now?
think for me, it meant being controlled by fear versus controlling fear. That's the transition point. Like, and if you look at a lot of passage, rites of passage and rituals that different tribes do, a lot of it is based around facing an extraordinary amount of fear or pain and coming out of it. And there's a confidence that comes from that. Like, I would say, if you're asking me, Matt, what's the biggest benefit you got out of training with the Navy SEAL for years, and you're doing training and getting to a pretty high skill level? The answer is confidence. Like, there was a confidence level that I still have that is powerful. Like, it is powerful. Like, women feel it, men feel it. And just to give you a recent example, and I haven't been in a violent situation in a very, very long time. Thank God. I have no interest in being in one either. But the other day, I'm in the gym. This is like really recent, and a friend of mine, my training partner, was having some conflict with one of his exes. So his ex was there, training partner is there, and they're kind of going at it. And again, I'm not getting involved. I'm cool. And she calls over another guy that's like 100 pounds heavier than my friend, because this guy's probably 6'2", 6'3". And I'm like, I can't. I'm not gonna let this fly. Like, there's no way. You know what I mean? Like, if he touches my friend, I'm getting involved.
Yeah.
So, anyways, I walk up to him, to the other guy, and I just stare at him for about 90 seconds, and I'm ready to go, and he sees I'm ready to go, and he walked away. And that's been a really powerful thing, where, just being ready to go typically will demotivate and de-escalate a lot of situations. And I think also from a female perspective, they can pick up on that energy. I mean, when you have that warrior vibe, women are highly attracted to that. And there was definitely a turning point on my ability to attract women from the before and after on that whole transformation. So yeah, I think that a man is just able to feel fear and just take the right action no matter what. Like, to me, that's the definition.
Awesome, Matt. That was a great answer. I really appreciate you diving into that. This has been such a fantastic conversation. Thank you so much for giving me your time. Where can people find out more about you if they want to tune into you and pay attention to you? Anything you want to promote or push?
MattGallant.tv is a blog that I wrote a lot of kind of timeless content pieces, and as you mentioned, a bit of my story. I'm due for a part 6 on that soon, but a lot has changed since then. But yeah, basically a couple of free books in there, including kind of a productivity, time management, energy management book called 3X Your Productivity. You can download that for free. I've had nothing to sell you on my site. If you want to follow me on Instagram, it's one of the few places where I post stuff once in a while. I made the conscious decision, at least up to this point, to not be on social media that much. So you'll see pictures of cats and foods once in a while and things like that. But yeah, the main way you can follow what I do is through BiOptimizers and Utopia. Like, I made the decision. So I've helped a lot of people. I've been partners, like business partners with people that have got to millions of followers on socials, YouTube, etc. And, I don't have the wiring, back to wiring, that I know myself be true. I don't have the wiring where I get validation and dopamine from comments and likes and stuff. Like, to be successful on social media, to be like some of my friends that post 20, 30 stories a day on Instagram or TikTok, you need to be fed by that. You know what I mean? So I don't have that. And what fuels me is more creating great products and putting them out in the world and helping people that way. So I feel like my products speak for themselves, and or the products I'm involved in or that we release speak for themselves. And yeah, check out BiOptimizers.com. Check out Neutopia.com. Neutopia is a revolutionary, customized, personalized brain optimization system where we build personalized nootropics for you, and you can customize and personalize. We help guide you through that journey. So yeah, it's been a personal life changer for me and as well as our customers. So check it out.
Awesome. Well, Matt, thanks again. I appreciate it. And from the bottom of my heart, thank you for, all that you do and all that you've done for me personally and for the world. And it's been a great conversation.
Yeah, thanks, man. It was a great interview. I
best.
think this was the most personal, in-depth interview. And I love that you're going that direction. When everybody's zigging, you zag. And when everybody's zagging, you zig. And I feel like going deep on the personal side is a good zig to everybody's zag in the podcast space. So I think you're going to do well.
Yeah. Thanks, Matt. Appreciate it. I'll talk to you again soon.